welcome to Gimle Talks.
Thank you, Cameron.
Yeah, I am Cameron Hoadley, and this is Mpiti.
My name is Mpiti Mosothoane.
Yeah, and I'm from the United States.
And I'm from Lesotho.
And it is either 5 o'clock in the morning or at night. But regardless, we're drinking coffee. And because this is a first episode, I have a question for you.
Okay.
I am very curious. We've been able to get to know each other for about 6 months. And our first interaction with each other was me helping you find your suitcase and your place to live.
Yes.
And I found it very interesting, especially when it came to how many people, there's like 40 internationals, and they brought them to Gimle. And now we are sitting here together. What was your reason for choosing to stay with Gimle? And in so doing, we now developed a relationship with a common interest. Mm-hmm. Why stick with Gimle, and why would you say, and why would you appreciate this kind of space as well as the people?
Well, when we first heard about Gimle, I believe it was during that presentation that one of the EVS guys gave. Mm-hmm. And we, I think, were inside the tank when he was talking, and it resonated with me quite well. And in fact, I remember a number of students actually signed up when they sent out the volunteer form. I signed up as well, not knowing what to expect. Later on, I also signed up for INSP, and a lot of the people who volunteer at INSP also double up and volunteer here as well. So it was kind of a natural progression to go to both places, because they're quite interlinked in the sense that the social circles at both places tend to overlap quite a bit. And so I guess in summary, my main reason for sticking with Gimle is because of the social circles that I'm a part of. But moreover, I think specifically on Gimle itself, there's just so much that this place offers. Just looking at this setting that we're in now, it's so nice and cozy, and I think this is what typifies this place, and part of the appeal to me at least. Just coming to a place that's nice, cozy, and right in the heart of the city of Roskilde, and just being in good company, having nice food, nice drinks, and just hanging out. I think, that's really part of the great appeal for me. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Usually when it comes to like going to a new place, this is my first time in Europe.
Okay.
I have always found it I'm trying to like diverge from like being the tourist and exploring the area and going to the main spots, and volunteering has always been finding meaningful connection. Instead of like being paid for money, you go there and you're paying for the meaningful relationships and the time. Mm-hmm. And the moment when it came to the foundation course, which is what we were part of, mm-hmm. they were throwing these volunteer initiatives in front of us. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yes. And I remember signing up and making sure that everyone in my dorm would mm-hmm. sign up as well, mm-hmm. just to make it where everyone would be inclusive and to be able to experience as well, because doing volunteer shifts back home mm-hmm. has been very beneficial. And when it came to this as well as INSP, I remember having a very like deep interest in Gimle, and mm-hmm. then finding out that you were doing INSP actually motivated me to go. And from that point, the people that were regulars, that were people from France as mm-hmm. well as certain areas of Europe, progressed me to come back mm-hmm. and just develop that relationship more and more. So mm-hmm. even when it came to like doing volunteering, it was always going for the company mm-hmm. and sharing that as well, because it's honestly quite incredible when it comes to people that admire volunteer initiatives mm-hmm. and just kind of trying to share that moment of making it meaningful. And mm-hmm. that's why I always choose to come back, because you don't know mm-hmm. like what the night will carry. Mm-hmm. And that's why I appreciate it. And that's my motivation, was just my past volunteer history. Mm-hmm. Why would you, and if it was in your like plethora of like, life, did you have volunteer initiatives in the past? Mm-hmm. And like what ended up bringing you to Denmark? What mm-hmm. were you doing before?
Okay. Well, before I get to that, I'll just go back to a point you mentioned about how Gimle is this international environment, and I completely agree. A lot of the people who come here are from different places around Europe and around the world, and many of these places I personally have never been to, and coming to Gimle is just an opportunity to, I guess, in a sense, go to the world, because the people of the world are here. So I think, that's an excellent point that you mentioned. But when it comes to the volunteer initiatives that I've had in the past, I think one particularly relevant one in connection to Gimle and INSP as well is a place called Food Bank in the city of Maastricht in the Netherlands. I lived there many years ago, and I remember I used to go there. What it was it was a place where students and people in the city of Maastricht could go every Friday and have free food. And the food was sourced from people who would sell in the local market and supermarkets. And so Food Bank had an agreement with all of these people, and they would donate the food. And what we volunteers would do is in the afternoon on Friday, we would go around the city and collect the food, and then cook the food. And then in the evening, people would come to Food Bank, and we would just have a great time. And the whole concept of the place was that you would go there for free, and however much you felt that the meal that you ate was worth was how much you could, if you wanted to, volunteer to pay. And I loved this place precisely for the same reasons as I love Gimle, the international atmosphere, the people, and so on. It was lovely. And so when I arrived at INSP, I remember I met a guy named Rob. Now, Rob is actually from the Netherlands and had actually lived in the same city. And so when I mentioned to him that I used to go to Food Bank, he was, of course, absolutely flabbergasted, because he too also used to go there, and it was an immediate connection. And we started talking a lot, of course, and so that's also part of the reason why I ended up becoming so intimately connected to both places. So I don't recall the question you asked, but I think that's a long-winded answer.
No, that's fine. I'll kind of add on to that, because the reason why I was like really excited about Gimle is I used to volunteer at a theater, and they would do concerts. And what happened with the volunteers is you could have access to the whole building. And I remember just casually walking in, like nervous, and I went to the first person who was like setting up the stage. I went a half hour early, and I'm like, "Hey, do you know the manager?" And she looked so confused. She's like, "I have no idea who this is." And so I like started to walk around and went up to the building, and later I found out that was the lead singer of like this bluegrass band, and she's like got many awards. And I progressively started to go more often, and you could, as a volunteer, go and hang out with the bands. And you would get backstage, and you could just sit there and just watch and see the entire show. So I would go every Friday night and volunteer there and do that. And I was like hoping, that I would get a similar experience coming to the Raven as well as Gimle. And when it comes to volunteer initiatives, you don't necessarily know what you're going in for. So I was a security guard. And when it came to here, it was like bartending. And I never bartended before. So I was going to be like, I'm going to gain that and add that to my catalog of different things that I can do. And in the long run, you just kind of develop a relationship with the people and get those like side benefits, because now you can write that on your resume of like, I was a bartender at one point, and I was a security guard, just all these different like things that you can add to it.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was kind of my main initiative with it. But I know that you came from different Scandinavian countries, and I don't necessarily know exactly why you ended up in Denmark. So you're originally from Lesotho.
That's right.
Why the Scandinavian area? Like, what was your interest, especially before you came here, and what has been your experience up to this point, and why you made the decision to come now in Roskilde?
That's quite an interesting question. I don't know that there necessarily has been a plan in mind to say, I'll go to this country, do this, and then that. But it's more been a steady, natural progression from one place to another. And so I'm in my mid-20s now. And initially when I left Lesotho, my plan was to come to Europe, study for my bachelor's degree, and then hopefully afterwards return back home because that's where my entire family is. And so it kind of still is my plan to this day. But as I think it was Robert Frost who wrote the poem, the one about two roads. Do you remember what the title is?
I have no idea. I'm sorry.
It goes, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and be one traveler. I stood before both and looked at both of them. And so I butchered the words, but it's words to that effect. And so essentially, different opportunities presented themselves to me. I finished my bachelor's degree, and then afterwards I thought, I could go back home or I could continue studying. And I actually found the University of Roskilde during that process of deciding whether to go home or to continue studying. Where I was living at the time, I knew a bunch of people from Roskilde, actually. And I spoke to them a little bit about the city and about the university. I liked what they said. And I also did my own research online about the city, about the university, and its proximity to Copenhagen. And I thought to myself, this is actually would be quite an ideal place to be, because all of this was happening, I believe, last year. And it was right at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I was thinking to myself, if there's any place in the world that would be ideal to be in, perhaps Scandinavia is that place. And a compromise between the high northern countries like Iceland and the northern parts of Sweden, Norway, and Finland, and where we are now, I think Denmark is an excellent compromise, because you get to have the best of two worlds, in a sense. You have, of course, the culture and all that comes with being in Scandinavia, but also you have an intimate connection to the rest of Europe as well, which is what I feel perhaps is missing with living in the high northern countries. Of course, they have their own appeals, but that's something entirely different. And so, in summary, I guess I found that, Denmark, and specifically this place that we're in now, Roskilde, was quite ideal for my requirements and where I was in life at the time. And so, looking back on it now, I can say that it's definitely been a good decision. So much growth has happened here, so many experiences, I've met so many people, and that's continuing to happen even with the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, that's kind of the shortened version of it, how I ended up here. Tell me about you. How did you end up here? Because you're from the United States, of course. You're from Washington State, in the far west of the United States, the northwest, I believe.
Basically the corner.
Yes.
Well, basically it is the corner. I will say that I don't have a more strategic plan like you did. It was just kind of, I wanted to end my bachelor's in a different country. That was the goal. I was like, something big, something like climactic. And I remember just going to my administrative office and just being like, anywhere, just please. Because I was like, Spain, Japan, Cuba, something, just an island. And they told me Denmark would be the easiest. And I ended up coming here with no hopes that it was going to be successful. And it worked. And it was at the time, like, we had like 54 cases or something like that. And I remember like getting onto the train and like getting through immigration, and they like almost didn't let me in. And I ended up getting in with no COVID test. And I remember going on with the train with a mask on, people looking at me like, what is he doing? And it was a simple decision like that of just wanting to get out and explore the world. Because in the States, if you kind of hear about Europe, it's just like, oh, you do that in college and that's the fulfilling life. And I was talking to a lot of people older an older generation of just like, what is the one thing that you regret not doing? And some of them would be like traveling the world, or like doing, and specifically in college is like not doing an exchange. And so I took that and was just like, am I going to fall into the same narrative of their life, or am I going to try and do something? And I wanted to be a little bit ambitious. So I ended up deciding whatever part of the world it would be. It could be the Middle East, it could be Australia. I was just going to end up there. Conveniently, though, I had a Danish roommate who is a phenomenally fun person, and he ended up being my sponsor and getting me here. Had no intention at the time, and he just talked up Roskilde a lot of how similar it was to my college as his, and it's the hippie college. And yeah, I ended up being able to reconnect with him since I got here, and his girlfriend that he decided to court while he was in the States is now here. And it's just this nice full circle of just being able to see how small the world can be sometimes, and just to kind of make that connection. And I find that very beautiful. So just when it comes to, especially when it comes to this theme of Gimle Talks and the internal dialogue, there's an important part of Gimle, which is the music. And we've kind of discussed this here and there, and especially when it comes to our cultures, like mine's very oversaturated, and I know little to nothing about yours. So when it comes to, let's just say, a genre or anything on the lines of that, how would you describe Lesotho's like influence on music, and maybe something that is unique to you that you kind of carry with you since you've been kind of traveling Europe, and that you would share with people just to kind of gain that unique perspective?
Where to start with this? Well, Lesotho is a very small country, not just in the world, but also in Africa as well. Its location in the world is also a little bit weird. We're completely surrounded by perhaps one of the most famous countries in Africa, South Africa. So most people, in fact, don't even know that Lesotho exists because of our famous neighbor. When people look at a map of Africa, they know, oh, South Africa, Nelson Mandela, and that's all they see. But they don't see that tiny little circle there, which is, if you ask many people from Lesotho, the heart of the region. Because, of course, without the heart, the entire body cannot function. And so when it comes to music, if you look at the history of the region, Lesotho became an independent country long before South Africa did. And so a lot of literature in the native Sesotho language was actually developed first in Lesotho, and then later on to South Africa after South Africa became independent. And with the development of literature also came the development of the arts in the Sesotho language again. And of course, a lot of artists from Lesotho later moved to South Africa, which is a much bigger platform. And so the genres of music, I think the most famous genre of music that a lot of people resonate with is something called famo music. And so what it is it's a genre of music that rests heavily on the accordion as a musical instrument.
Really?
Yes, indeed. And so it's a pity you haven't heard any track from the famo genre, but after this podcast, I'll send you a few tracks. But essentially, it involves the artists playing the accordion to a certain rhythm, and then them narrating a poem. So there's almost always a section of poetry in the tracks. I think in every single track that I've heard, there's a section of poetry. So it's not just singing, but it's also a recital of poetry. And so what distinguishes the best artists from the average ones is their ability, I suppose this is the same in every language, in every genre, but it is their ability to convey a message in the most lyrically appealing way. But more broadly speaking, my personal taste on music has been heavily influenced by my upbringing. And where I grew up, of course, with my parents and with my grandfather, and they listened a lot to a genre of music called Afro jazz, specifically the brand from Southern Africa. And many of the pioneers of this brand hailed from, of course, Lesotho, South Africa, but also Zimbabwe, Zambia, and so on. Now, the interesting thing about all of these countries is people speak different languages. So I understand some of the languages, but the majority of them I do not. But still, the music resonates very deeply with me. And so I think that's a very interesting thing about music. You may not necessarily understand the language that the artists are singing in, but somehow it still speaks to your soul. So that's quite interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I gotta say, if you say that it's an accordion and poetry, I'm like, that does describe you a little bit. If I could say, if you were a music genre, just when it comes to my side, we tend to be, I would say, the center of attention when it comes to some music. And so I grew up with the convenience of things always being in English. And it was surreal to kind of like go to countries where English isn't their native language. And even like taxi drivers who don't speak a word of English, like would be singing English songs while I'm like in the car with them. And I'm just like, this is cool. And it's difficult. It's also it's a little difficult to like try and describe the United States with just one genre or one instrument. I would have to say if it came to Washington, which is 4 times larger than Denmark, and describe that in a genre, it would be grunge.
Grunge?
Yeah.
What is grunge?
Ooh, you asked the right person. If you know Nirvana, if you know even Soundgarden or any of those bands that kind of grew up in the 90s, it was a rebellious act from the 80s, which was like the butt metal and just like Bon Jovi. They were trying to redefine it and make it where like you didn't have to be a good singer. You could just be this raunchy, just wearing like torn jeans and still be a famous star. That kind of originated from that point, but it was this idea of freedom that came from it. And you could be as loud as you wanted. You could scream the vocals and just like throw stuff at the audience and people would love you even more. And that's kind of what I grew up with. I would go to shows, local shows, and I would just have people scream in my ear, and I would come out not being able to hear my friends. And yes, it damaged my ears over time, but the experience of it, of just that idea of freedom, resonated with me a lot. And I still carry that because it is this lack of understanding that can come from it, of people always assuming that you need to have this good showmanship a little bit. Because I've seen some shows where an artist like peed himself on stage, and people applauded it
on purpose. He did that on purpose. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
He like drank a 6-pack. Yeah, I'll Mac DeMarco if anyone knows him. And people wanted him to strip on stage, but that's kind of in my area. The idea of like a good show is just like, how bizarre can this be? And I know that there are certain movements in music whereas trying to redefine itself and challenge the norm. And that's kind of where I come from, is you don't know what's necessarily around the corner. And they always want to do some post idea to a very popular genre and make it and redefine it in the way that they want to. And I could go on a list of different ones, because the moment I was leaving my hometown, like humble, or what was it? It's like mumble rap. Like you just be as quiet as possible. Like, I can't hear you. Like, please talk louder. Actually became very popular, and it was controversial for the time. But that's kind of what I like, is always trying to push the envelope, as well as make it where you see something new and unique, and it's encouraged a little bit. And even if it fails or it flops on itself, it's very interesting to kind of see a new direction for it. And one thing that's also popular, and especially when it comes to shows back home, is like you'll see a musician just hop down off the stage and just sing in the middle of the crowd and like start a mosh pit or something ridiculous. But I would say, even when it comes to like Europe and coming here, I took an idea that I would listen to more classical music. Okay. And being like, oh, it's the history of like if I was going to take it on an anthropological standpoint, this is where humans started or something. And I was curious to kind of see the history and people's perspectives of music. And I was, in some cases, a little, I wouldn't say disappointed, but not necessarily surprised at the same time of seeing how the United States also has like a heavy footprint here too. But even when it comes to Denmark, local bands, what they sing, and like hearing actually Danish music has been really eye-opening for me too. And so what has been your experience when it came to, let's just say you're in a new region,
right?
You know, you can kind of redefine your music taste or find something else or listen to the same stuff. What has been new since you've been here that you kind of discovered just by surprise or completely intentionally, and that was what you were hoping for when it comes to music?
I'll circle back to that, but I like what you said about how the United States has this heavy footprint all across the world. It's not just Europe, it's everywhere. I think just music and art from the United States, everyone from all over the world is familiar with. And so I too, of course, know a lot of artists and music from the United States. And I grew up with a lot of it too. So the US music culture has had a heavy influence on me too. But to answer your question, I quite like some of the music styles, especially here in Denmark. I remember when we started with the foundation course, there was a track that I believe had taken the whole of Denmark by great storm. I think it's called Solherv or something along that. I don't know if Solherv is the name of the artist, but yeah, it's a very fun track to listen to that you can jam to for just about any celebratory occasion. Just, I guess, house music in Denmark, I think, has truly opened my eyes to a totally different genre of music that I wasn't aware existed. And it's quite interesting, I think, discovering these genres of music because, of course, when you think of the musical scene in Europe, like you said, there's classical music that everybody knows and everyone studies perhaps when they're young. That's all well and good, but I think being exposed to what young people these days are listening to, so the Danish people who I live with, for example, they're always an interesting contact point between me and the musical culture in this country. And even though, of course, I don't understand the language all too well, I do find it quite interesting to just listen and kind of allow myself to get lost in the music of this place. I think music is also an interesting way for people to find each other and connect with each other. I have a flatmate who it's very difficult, I think, to get to know Danish people. This is well known throughout the world. But I think how we've managed to find each other was through music. So me taking an interest in his musical tastes and asking to know more about, so what do these lyrics mean and why do you like it so much, or finding out what are people listening to these days. And of course, clubs and other social gathering venues are closed now, but listening to Danish people explain what they would be listening to if they were to be in social scenes and so forth, I think that's quite interesting. One of the draws for me, especially of Roskilde, was the Roskilde Festival. And I think that's one of the main cultural exports from Denmark in general. Perhaps it is what makes this city particularly well known throughout the world. It is a great pity, of course, that because of the pandemic, it doesn't seem likely that the festival will go on. But I've seen video footage of some of the past events, and it's quite interesting seeing how even though, of course, it is Denmark, but it does have that ability to bring together different artists from different parts of the world. I believe for last year they had the likes of Taylor Swift and other big cultural icons, including some artists that I hadn't heard of, local ones, and I was looking forward to being a part of that. But hopefully in the future that will be a possibility.
Yeah, I know. I've, especially going back home, festivals are so popular, and I've never been to one. And I find it interesting as well, especially coming here, because I share a playlist with like my Danish roommate back home who lives here now. And I was just like, he's playing so much EDM. Is EDM just the popular genre in Denmark? Oh no. Because I was trying to escape that. But it's relatively, there's like an 80s synth, pop genre that I've noticed quite a bit too when I talk to people. And that's where I find it so intriguing, is like its natural influences and maybe where the direction that it's going to be going. I do wish that there were more festivals going on, and you could kind of have that idea. It's the beauty of the Raven, is that they're always throwing shows, and that's kind of where you can learn more and more of just the music scene here. Hip hop has taken the world by storm a little bit, I would say, and I've noticed that too. And that's where it's just like there are subgenres in hip hop that have become very popular in Denmark that was unsuspecting. And when it comes to like different languages, and going back onto that point, that was one thing that I may have taken for granted, is that everything tended to be in English. And so I wanted to get a more worldly perspective. Let's just say I had a little revelation. And the first one that I actually touched on was Bossa Nova, which was down in Brazil. And it does have like a very classical feel to it. It's like, man, if you just like listen to the music and close your eyes, you're just picturing flowers in a river and a lake. And it's just like this fantasy. And that's one thing that I find very intriguing when it comes to people's approaches to music. And where I tend to diverge, and where I think some people may resonate with it, is I actually really like slow, melodramatic, melancholy music. But it makes me so happy to listen to, because I remember sharing that with you at one point in time.
Yes, I do remember that.
I know, and you didn't respond at one point, and I was like, oh no, like, is he going to judge me on this too?
No, that was because it was a very long track that you shared with me. I think it was 20 minutes long.
It's 20 minutes long, yes.
And so after you sent it to me, I thought to myself, well, this is a very meaningful track to Cameron, and so what I should do is give it the due time and consideration that it deserves. And so I waited until I had the time to actually listen properly to it, and I think I was doing my homework at some point, and so I put it on and listened to it for the full 20 minutes, as well as other tracks from the same artists. And I think it was quite, it allowed me to get a deeper sense, I guess, of you as a person. Because how you explained it to me, I believe you told me that this was indeed one of your top or most favorite artists and favorite tracks as well. And so if someone puts so much weight on a particular track, I think it deserves due time and consideration. And so that's what I gave it. And so, I think after I listened to it, it changed my opinion of you a little bit in a positive way, in that it, I think, made me realize that you are a much more complex person than I first thought initially when I met you. Because to be totally honest, I had never been exposed to this type of genre before, let alone never have I had the opportunity or inclination to listen to a 20-minute track from the same artist. I think it's not something usual to do, but nevertheless, it was a very interesting experience.
Okay.
Yeah, and thank you for that.
Oh yeah, no problem. That's why I have to be like really careful with who I share it with. I have two questions. Do you have a favorite song? Like full scope. Like in this moment, if you could think of just one song that would be Mpiti's definition of like his favorite song, do you have one?
This is a song that I keep going back to a lot these days. it is one of my favorite songs. I don't know if it is absolutely my favorite song, but it definitely is one of. And the track name is Wasakara. It's by a man named Oliver Mtukudzi. He was a very, very, very famous Zimbabwean musician. And so what the word Wasakara means is you're getting old or you're aging. And so in that song, he talks about how as a person ages and goes through the different stages of life, there are certain things that he should do and be aware of. And part of that is simply getting your affairs in order in general, in as far as, I suppose, living in a more impactful and meaningful way. And so that's kind of the scope of the song. And so this track, I think, has taken particular resonance with me these days because I haven't been to Lesotho now in just over 2 years. And so in that time, a lot has happened to people I know back home and also people here as well. And it has finally hit home to me, I guess, that I am indeed getting older. And because, you know, as you get older, of course, your friends get married and some of them have children. And there are these big life changes that nowadays I experience vicariously or remotely from here. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the main reasons why I keep going back to this track a lot these days, because it's an old track. I think the artist made it almost 20 years ago. But I think I listen to it a lot these days. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The follow-up and essentially what you kind of covered is when do you find yourself listening to this specific track? Mm-hmm. Like, is it when you're feeling in this specific moment mm-hmm. of reminiscent of home and mm-hmm. having this thought, it could be just the effect of it has. Like, mm-hmm. if it just comes up randomly, this is what you're thinking about when you're listening to this track mm-hmm. is just like, do you have this feeling of like feeling rushed in life of like, oh, I'm not doing enough? Mm-hmm. Or is it just like, it can have this optimistic and like encouraging feeling of just like, I'm doing so much mm-hmm. and I'm getting older and I'm mm-hmm. like seeing all these great things happening. I'm not part of them, but mm-hmm. there are like so many moving pieces and I get to just kind of live and see them happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of the effect of it? Because it can be listening to some music puts you in a very like sad state, or is mm-hmm. this one that makes you feel very good mm-hmm. and that you find yourself going back to it because you enjoy that feeling that it gives you and the thoughts that come with it?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's quite a packed question. I would say, firstly, how I came to know this track in the first place was I would hear it a lot in my childhood, which is when it was first released, and it was a very big hit because in fact, when the artist first released it, it was kind of a satirical thing that he was doing because his country had a president who had been there for many, many, many years, almost 4 decades. And so him saying, "You're getting old," was a backhanded way of encouraging that president to retire. But he did it in such an intelligent way that it also spoke broadly to the general population to get your affairs in order, settle things, and make space for the next generation. And so the reason why I think I keep going back to it now, is, I guess, part of it, indeed, the nostalgia, in that it brings me back to those moments of my childhood. But also, I guess, I don't think that because you asked if I feel like I'm rushed in life. I don't necessarily think that I'm rushed per se or in a rush myself, but I think from time to time it is important to reflect on your progression in life and to examine where you've been and where you're going. And I think music, specifically tracks like this, provide you an excellent opportunity to do precisely that. And it having been, we just went through the start of the of this year, and we're in the midst of a pandemic where a lot of social obligations have been eliminated, and people are spending more time at home and also have more free time. And what I like to do, at least, is to use that time partly to reflect. And I think this track particularly puts me in a reflective mood. Not one necessarily of sadness or particularly happiness, but just taking stock of my life and my experiences and those of people that I've met along the way. And in fact, I think this is an interesting segue into particularly these or this track that you sent me, that you said was one of your favorite tracks. Maybe you could expand on why you like it so much, and pretty much the same question that you threw at me, thrown right back at you, like why?
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the track that I shared with Mpiti is Blaze Bailey Finnegan III by Godspeed You Black Emperor, which is a post-rock band from Quebec, Canada. And Sleep was the first one that I threw your direction, and that was one that got me into the band. But that track in particular is more of a character study. If you look at the lyrics themselves, it's actually an interview that one of the band members has with just a random homeless guy in the United States. And his is about this, the story goes of him going to court because he had a speeding ticket. And he goes to the judge and throws it at him and throws the $20. And he's just like, I can like throw you in jail. And he's like, I don't care. Like, I am just at this point in life that you can do whatever you want to me. You have all this power. What are you going to do? And he kind of challenges the judge. And so if you hear him talk, you're just like, oh, this man, he's like breaking from the fold of life. And if you hear him talk, he's just like preaching a little bit. And he kind of references a preacher over time. And then you find out later, especially at the latter end, he came from this poetry out loud. And they ask him to read his poem. And you hear this poem, and you're just like, this is so well written. And you're really blown away by it. And it's never revealed in the track at all. And what you find out if you look it up, because I was so infatuated by this story, is that they were actually stolen lyrics from an Iron Maiden song.
Okay.
And he completely fabricated that. I don't know if the story's real or any of that, or if he took it from someone. But it's kind of where you can get infatuated with someone without getting to know them in a general sense. And if you listen to the track, it's overlaid with like violin and piano. It kind of gives a more elevated feeling. And then it closes on just this beautiful sound. I can't even say it. They're very ambient. Godspeed You Black Emperor tends to be. It's actually not my favorite track. It's my favorite track by them.
Right.
My favorite track of all time is definitely one called Could Have Moved Mountains.
Okay.
And it's by a band called a Silver Mount Zion Memorial Orchestra and Tra-La-La Band. That is their full name.
That's quite a... Could Have Moved Mountains.
Could Have Moved Mountains.
Okay.
And I find myself going back to that track in particular because the idea of just the name itself, Could Have Moved Mountains, is just like my interpretation of it goes back to being a big dreamer of like being 18, being like, life can throw whatever they want at me and I can take it. And you kind of find yourself being like, I can do these things, but life is so hard that I can't do them. And so I find myself going back to that track being like, if I died tomorrow or something serious happens, I would have had the ability to move mountains, but because life was getting in the way and all these obstacles, I was unable to do so. And that's where I found myself was I was trying to do big things and they were unsuccessful, and that's just like failure, you know? And I would go to that track and just being like, hey, like life is going to keep moving forward and just to keep pushing. And so I would listen to that track, and it's a beautiful track. I absolutely love it.
I'll definitely check it out. I think
it's also really sad. That's the thing is when it comes to like very soft music, I get happy a little bit. It puts me in a state of mind of just optimism and just really taking life as it is and trying to face reality on reality's terms. And that's the thing is like you can just be such a dreamer and you're being unrealistic. And that's kind of where you have to look at it in a very balanced sense. And whatever can bring me to that point in revelation, I will find whatever avenue I need to get there to kind of come back to ground a little bit. And so that was like a defining moment. Currently, the song that I'm just going back to is, and what I love is trying to define a moment in life by a song. So like I'll be listening to the song on repeat because something great's going on, and I'm like, I'm going to keep playing this because I love what it's making me feel. And when that moment's gone, you can always listen to that track and just remember, you know, and you have that attachment, that nostalgia of the moment. And even when it comes to like this moment in time, there is a track in mind that I've been listening to and going back to, and that it's going to be defining January as well as February of my time in Denmark and going through this interesting shutdown in this period of my life. And now I don't know what's around the corner, you know?
What is that song, by the way?
It is White Gloves by Krongbin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's referencing back to like a girl with white gloves that you just are idolizing. And it is referenced to a specific person, and now that person's gone. And like I remember when she was leaving, I'm just like, I've been listening to the song on repeat. If you want to listen to it, it actually defines our like whole relationship. And it means a lot to me. And every time I hear it, I think about you. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think some people may take that approach as well. So, yeah, those are kind of the two songs that I have. I don't know if is the one that you're listening to currently the one that is from, I forget the name of it. I'm so sorry. Of your favorite track.
I don't blame you. Of course, it's a foreign language. The name is Wasakara.
Wasak. And is that the song that you're listening to currently, or?
Yeah, it's one of the songs that I keep going back to these days. But much like you, I think different phases of my life are, I guess, encompassed or encapsulated in different songs. I look back to when I was in high school. There were songs that were very popular in those days that we would listen to as high school students. And every time I hear them today, they always take me back to those days. And so I think, yeah, definitely certain songs have that ability to be connected to a certain phase in life, but also to different places as well, or to different people, like in your case. Yeah, I could think of a number of tracks. I think, let's see. As I said, this particular track that I just mentioned, that's a song that my dad actually listened to quite a bit growing up. And every time I listen to it, it always reminds me of him. And I call him at times to say, oh yeah, you know, every time I listen to this track, it reminds me of you. And he's like, I'm glad that if anything, I've at least given you good music taste.
No, that says the same.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I kind of have fun with my family because my dad's a huge Billy Joel fan. Okay. And his name's Joel, so I don't know if there's a connection. Yeah. But I'm kind of holding off on becoming a Billy Joel fan, just being like, until later. Like right now, if I'm just going to please every like piece of your music taste, then I'm just rushing it. But yeah, do you have like, would you say that is the artist that defines like your family? Because my family in particular, we have an artist that like, we'll go head over heels and see them in a heartbeat. That actually defined my childhood because, you know, you're brought up by your family and their music taste has such a heavy influence on it. So is there like an artist in particular that you've grown up with that if you haven't seen them live or any connection on that front, that it would be the dream to like see them, because then it would be the full circle of like you've grown up hearing this person, you finally get to see them.
I don't know that there's a particular artist that fits this role, but perhaps maybe a specific music genre that does fit this role, certainly. And I suppose if you think of music genres, you will think of artists and their songs. And so I suppose, there are some artists that I suppose if I heard that they were going to be in a particular location, I would absolutely drop everything and go and watch their concert. I remember, in fact, one of my good friends, he's from Japan. When we were in Norway, he found out that Taylor Swift was going to perform in Oslo. This is in July of last year. And so he was talking about it all the time. And so a bunch of us bought tickets to go to the Taylor Swift concert. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it got cancelled, so we didn't end up going. But yeah, music, I guess, has that appeal on people. And I must say, in fact, that at that point, I was not such a big Taylor Swift fan because I wasn't too exposed to her music. But afterwards, I listened to some of her songs, and I will admit that they are quite catchy.
Oh, it happened. I'm not there yet.
You're not there yet? Okay. No. We all have our Taylor Swift moments, so maybe yours will come.
I don't know. See, the thing is like there are Taylor Swift songs, and I don't realize that they're her, and I'm just like humming to them, and I'm like, oh no, like I finally did it. That's actually Lady Gaga, and I will admit that. Yeah. That there are some Lady Gaga tracks that have gotten to me. And no, so growing up for me, concerts have been a huge part. Like I can't even count the amount of concerts I've been to. Has that kind of been the same experience for you? Because it's like a whole different world. Like you can listen to tracks over and over and over again, but once you hear it live by that specific artist, it just takes on a different like character. Were there a lot of concerts happening in Lesotho, or has that just been kind of your experience since you've moved away?
I did not go to too many concerts, I guess, in my life. I guess it just hasn't been a big part of my upbringing. But I do remember particularly there was one time, I think I was maybe in middle school, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Lil Wayne, and T-Pain, and a bunch of other artists, they had this huge combined concert in Johannesburg. And this concert was on a weekend. Of course, I knew these artists, but at that time, I just knew them as artists, and I wasn't too captivated by their music. But a bunch of people from that age group definitely were. And I remember going to school on the Friday of the weekend, and I think about 60% of my class was not there because most of them had gone to Johannesburg to watch this concert, because it's such a rare thing to have these big world-renowned artists performing so close to home. And so I guess you, of course, drop everything when they're close by. But if I'm to mention particular performances that I think have had, I guess, a great impact on me, I remember in 2010, during the opening ceremony of the World Cup in Johannesburg, I actually watched live the performance by Shakira doing Waka Waka and the dance, and that was just a very memorable time. And that's, I guess it wasn't really a concert per se, but it was a performance, I guess, of that I think fondly of.
Yeah. Have you been to a concert?
Have I been to a concert? Yes, I've been to concerts, but not concerts of well-known artists. In Europe, like for example, in France, I went to quite a few indie music concerts by local artists. But very, I guess, small and locally organized types of concerts.
No, those can be like the funnest. I find that, and this was my experience, is like if it's like the arenas, like you see this big band, like Foo Fighters or something like that, and then you're like in the corner of it, and you have to bring binoculars just to like see them. Or you go to a small show. They're very different experiences, and you may have more fun like at the smaller venue. And that, I think, is like the spectacle of it a little bit, is like you're just going because you are such a big fan of them, but you're just kind of sitting there listening to the same music, but it's live. Or you're very involved with the entire like show when it's just a small band, because you are showing how much you enjoy the music, and then you can kind of see that they're responding to you, and then vice versa. And I think when it comes to concerts, that's so important, because there was actually one show that I've been to, and they were about to break up.
Okay.
And they were actually a pretty big band. And so they sold out that show because everyone's like, this is their last one. And it turns out they were the ones that kind of abused their audience a little bit. So I went there and they made us wait an hour for them to start. And once they did, everyone was so excited. And at the time I had hair down to here. I was a very long haired person. And I remember I let my hair down and then people were just like going all over the place. And I came out of that show with my hair completely dried up from slobber and not taking a shower that night. And then I woke up in a daze, just covered in sweat and just putrid smell. And I remember having such a good time. And then I like started to get up out of bed and all my friends were sleeping on the floor. There was like a thing of meat in the sink and I don't remember why. I won't even explain it. But I remember getting up and like finding that my ribs and my waist were so sore and bruised because people were pushing each other so hard and just moving around. And I like reflect on it so fondly because it was like, it could be the last show and they were putting on they were such good showmans. And it was in that small venue. So I'm like trying to chase the unicorn a little bit of just trying to find those experiences again. And that's where it's like, maybe it's the genre. And it turns out it's not even the genre. It's more of the people within the bands and how they present themselves to the audience. And I think that that's equally important a little bit.
True. Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah,
and that's kind of where it can be important too. And where I find it very interesting is you can go the conventional route and kind of be very easygoing and receptive to like how people feel about you and humble, or you can be like like very egotistical, just like big shot and how people kind of respond to you. And it's kind of what I find so intriguing is I'm actually diverging away from the people that are big shots that kind of take like they want the center stage and maybe the ones that they do it because they love the idea of music and seeing how they go about it, but they're very despondent a little bit and kind of push people away because it wasn't their intention was to become popular. And I think especially when it comes to talking with people, especially when it comes to music and being a musician, how they would take it if things actually end up being successful, because some of them, and when I go back being at home and local artists, and especially ones that are here, is that they don't have any intention because they love what their life is. And if it became this notoriety that all of a sudden presented itself and everyone could recognize them, that it would ruin a little bit like the beauty of the music that they're making. And I find that very interesting when it comes to some musicians because they're pushing this point of like going to shows and maybe more people are coming and that they love that idea, but at the same time, they don't want it to get to a point of having it where it's too successful. And I don't know, I find that very, very interesting. And on
the note that you mentioned of having artists that I guess aren't particularly too well renowned, but also that have an ability to bring people together. I think here in Roskilde, and especially here at Gimle, we're very lucky because we have our friend Thijs and his bandmates. I believe they have a band called B-Side, or in Danish, I think it's B-Seal, or words to that effect.
Perfect. Yes.
And again, on what you said about doing things kind of chasing the unicorn in a sense, they performed a lot towards the end of last semester. And it's funny because we didn't know it at the time that we would be in such a long lockdown. But looking back on it now in hindsight, performances like that, which I guess going back to your question about have I attended any concerts, I suppose there you have it. I've been to a few concerts here in Roskilde, but attending concerts like that and having had the opportunity to do so around this time, especially given the current context that we're in now, it does definitely feel like one had the opportunity to ride a unicorn while it was still around before it went off into the sunset. So yeah, that's quite cool.
No, that's actually a good point to say. Should just excerpt that and just keep it in the back.
Yeah.
No, because I'm talking to like some of my friends and revolving about this particular and unfortunate situation is like my friends didn't know the ones that are in bands. that was their last show. You know, they were playing in a bar, and it was March of last year. They messaged me and just being like, oh yeah, it's been a year since we actually did a concert. Thankfully they're like doing more work and in the studio, so I'm like, oh, thank God. Like, I really enjoy what they make, and every single time that they produce something more, I'm blown away by it. Back when I was in Olympia, Washington, I was trying to help them get a show because they were going to do a tour. And because they were so unknown, I got them a show, and the guy thankfully was just like, oh, I'll put you in the middle of the act. And at the beginning, it was the bands that they wanted to see, the audience, and then they all dipped. And then when they came on, I was the only one there, so I decided to just grab a chair and plant it in the center of the stage and just watch them play. But it was an incredible show. Like, I gotta say, I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But I also find intriguing of just like the support and how to build a fandom, because sometimes it's online, and I see that happening more and more. And that's kind of what I find interesting too, is like how people start up and the avenues that they can kind of take. And like, I have friends that are SoundCloud rappers, and I'm just like, oh God, like, that's the route you decided to go. You're beautiful at guitar, but like, you decided to become a rapper. And the persona that they create is very interesting, but it's what kind of resonates with them. And that's also intriguing, because even when it comes to here, like, we have someone that's a musician anonymously, just off screen, who's an incredible drummer and plays a lot of the music that I have close to home, which is like 70s progressive rock and just like early metal, like Black Sabbath and all that. And what kind of sticks with them. And it just like, yeah, you can kind of see that it will attract a specific audience because of how successful it has been. And it would be cool to kind of see a show, because you know that it may not even be a younger audience. It will be definitely an older one, because they grew up with that genre. And why some people choose the genre that they have, because I find it so intriguing why like 80s synth pop is popping up in Denmark as well as certain areas, because it's going to attract an older audience, because people, especially ones that grew up in the 80s, loved what music was being created at that time, and just trying to resonate with a larger audience, and trying to bring in a younger one too. And that's what I find intriguing, because I've been the youngest person at a show as well as the oldest person at a show, and that's uncomfortable for me to say. Yeah, but no, it's very intriguing, and I don't necessarily know when it comes to the Raven. I unfortunately haven't been able to see much. I know that they tend to have comedy shows as well as different genres coming through. And it would be interesting to kind of see, especially when things pick up, what will be coming around the corner.
Sure. Yeah.
Mpiti, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Likewise, and thank you so much for this lovely conversation. And I look forward to many more with you over the course of our time here.
Oh, man, I'm so excited. All right, then yeah, I guess we can call it.
Cheers.
Oh.